He came out of the crowd at a dead run, low and grinning, and I knew before he reached us that he meant to hit me. You learn to read a body in motion the way you read weather. His shoulder was already dropping, his weight already loading onto the leading foot, his eyes locked not on the road he was crossing, but on the one man in the front rank he had picked out of 14. That man was me. I want to tell you what was behind my face in the half-second before he struck, because the whole world saw the outside of it and called it nothing, and the inside of it was the only thing that mattered. We were 11 minutes into the King's Mile, the ceremonial march from the lower barracks up the processional to the gates of Holt Court, a route my regiment has walked twice a week for longer than anyone alive can remember. 14 of us in 2 files of 7, bearskins up, rifles at the slope, the drum behind us setting a pace that does not change for rain, for heat, for a fainting tourist, or for a man who has decided that the most interesting thing he will do this year is to run across a moving column of the King's Guard and knock one of them off his stride. I had seen him 40 seconds earlier. That is the part no camera caught, and the part that decided everything. He was standing at the rope on the south pavement with a small clutch of others, and where every other face along that rope was turned to watch us, his was turned to watch the gap. He kept glancing down the column toward the far crossing point, then back at us, measuring. A man who is going to enjoy a parade looks at the parade. A man who is going to do something to a parade looks at the spaces between. I logged him the way I log everything from inside the stillness, not with my eyes which stayed forward but with the wide quiet attention they train into you until it is more reliable than sight. Tall, light jacket, a phone already up in his left hand, screened toward himself, which told me he was not filming the march. He was filming his own face. Whatever he was about to do, he had decided it would be a story about him. So I was not surprised. I want that on the record before anything else, because the version that traveled was the version where a reckless stranger ambushed an unsuspecting toy soldier, and that is not what happened. I was not unsuspecting. I was a man who had already decided, in the cold and orderly place behind my eyes, exactly what I would and would not do when the shoulder came. What I would do, hold the line. What I would not do, anything else. Let me tell you why those were the only 2 items on the list. Because if you have never stood in a column, you will think there were more. You will think I might have stepped aside, or braced and shoved back, or put out an arm, or turned my head to track him, or done any of the 100 small human things a body screams to do when another body is coming for it at speed. There were none of those. A marching column is not 14 men walking in the same direction. It is one thing made of 14 men, and the single law of that thing is that it does not break. The man behind me set his pace by my heels. The man beside me dressed his line by my shoulder. The drum gave us a heartbeat, and we were, for those minutes, a single disciplined animal moving up a hill. If I stepped aside, the man behind me would close on empty air and the file would buckle. If I braced and turned, the dress would go ragged and the whole front rank would have to correct, which on a crowded route with cameras on every phone is its own small disaster. The column's strength is that it cannot be moved by one man's hand. The instant it can, it is just a crowd in costume. He did not know any of that. He thought he was running at a person. He was running at a wall that happened to be wearing my face. I caught the motion of him leaving the rope. 40 seconds became 4. He ducked under the line where a steward's back was turned, and he came across the open road at an angle calculated to put his shoulder into mine at the exact moment. The column passed the crossing, not a stumble, not a drunk's wander, but a clean diagonal sprint, the kind a man runs when he has paced it out beforehand. I heard the steward shout. I heard a woman near the rope say, "Oh, oh no," in the rising tone people use a half-second before something they cannot stop. I heard the drum, unbroken, behind me. I did not break my pace. I did not turn my head. I fixed my eyes on the stone lintel of the court gate 800 yards uphill, the way I had fixed them on something distant 10,000 times before, and I gave the next step to the drum exactly as I had given it the step before. The hardest thing a guardsman ever does is nothing. At the precise moment, every nerve in him is built to do something. I have stood through a thunderclap that set off every car alarm on the processional. I have stood through a bee inside my collar in August. None of it taught me restraint the way the next half-second did, because none of it was a grown man choosing on purpose to drive his bones into mine to see if I would yelp. He hit me. It was not glancing. He put his whole running weight low into my left shoulder, the way a man hits a door he expects to be locked, and the world went sideways for the length of a breath. My rifle stayed at the slope. My heel found the stone where the drum said it should be. My right foot took the load my left could not, and the line behind me, God bless every one of them, did not so much as ripple, because the man at my back had felt me lurch and lengthened his own stride a half-inch to give me the road, and the man beside me had closed the dress the same instant, so that to anyone 50 feet away the column simply walked on as if a moth had bounced off it. But I will tell you the truth of the inside. The blow spun me a quarter turn off my axis, and for one ugly fraction of a second my weight was over nothing, and the oldest animal in me wanted to throw out a hand, grab a fistful of his jacket, and take him down to the cobbles with me. I could have. I knew exactly how. There's a version of that morning where I am the one the cameras catch with my hands on a civilian, and it does not matter at all that he started it, because the lie that travels is never the true beginning, only the worst-looking middle. I felt the one of it like heat, and I let it go past me the way you let a hard wave go past when you are braced in the surf. You do not fight the wave. You simply do not move, and it spends itself and is gone. I found my axis. I gave the drum its step. I marched. Behind me, I heard him laugh. It was the laugh that told me what kind of morning this was going to be. Not a startled laugh, not the nervous bark a man gives when he has done something stupid and the size of it has just landed on him. A pleased laugh, a delivered the goods laugh. He had got his shot. He had hit a KingsGuard square, and the KingsGuard had wobbled and not made a sound, and somewhere in his head a counter was already turning, the way those counters do, imagining the number it would climb to once the world watched him do it. He thought the wobble was the prize. He did not understand that the wobble was the whole of his case against him, recorded from 9 angles, time-stamped, and walking uphill ahead of him in 2 unbroken files. "Did you feel that?" he called, jogging now along our flank just outside the line of the column. His phone swung around to catch both his own grin and the side of my immovable face. He felt that. You all saw it. He moved. The statue moves. A few people at the rope laughed because people laugh at things they have not yet decided are wrong. Most did not. I heard, under the drum, the particular quiet of a crowd that has just watched something it does not like and is waiting to see what the men in red are going to do about it. We were going to do nothing about it. That is what they could not have known, and what he was counting on them not knowing. He believed silence meant he had won. He believed a thing that does not chase you cannot catch you. He ran ahead. I tracked him the only way I am allowed to track anything, straight forward, the long, quiet attention spreading out around the narrow beam of my eyes, and I felt rather than saw him plant himself 30 yards up the processional, dead in the center of our path, phone up, feet wide, chin out. He had decided the first hit was a warm-up. He was going to do it again, and this time face on, so the world could watch a wall of the KingsGuard either break around him or break him, and either way it would be his. I have thought a great deal since about the arithmetic he was doing. It is not stupidity exactly. Men like him are not stupid. He had run a clean diagonal, he had timed it to the crossing, he had kept the camera on his own face. He had done the math of attention with real skill. What he had got wrong was the oldest and simplest variable in the world. He thought the thing in front of him cared what he did. He thought provocation was a key that fit every lock, that if he pushed hard enough on a man who would not push back, the man would eventually give him the reaction that made the man his. He was racing the column. In his head it was already a contest, him against 14, his nerve against our stillness, and he was sprinting to a finish line he had drawn himself. The trouble with racing something that is not racing you is that you can run as hard as you like and never once be in the same event. The drum did not change. The sergeant on the flank, Halloran, 26 years in, a man whose voice I have heard cut through a gale, gave the smallest order I have ever heard him give, 2 words, level as a tabletop. Eyes front. We did not need it, but he said it so that everyone within the rope would hear that the column knew exactly what was happening and had already decided it did not require us to do anything but walk. There is a kind of authority that shouts. There is a deeper kind that lowers its voice because it is not in any doubt. The man in the road saw us coming and his grin tightened. I think that was the first moment something cold reached him, though he buried it fast. 14 men in close order do not look like 14 men when they are walking straight at you and not slowing. They look like a single fact with a drum behind it. He had imagined himself the immovable object meeting our unstoppable force, and somewhere in the last 10 yards, the picture flipped on him, and he understood with his body, if not yet with his mouth, that he was standing in front of something that would simply continue, and that continuing did not require us to hurt him. It only required him to be wrong about where he was standing. He stepped aside at the last instant. Of course he did. They always do, the ones who are sure the world will swerve when the world does not. But he could not let it be nothing. So as the column drew level, he lunged in a second time, sideways, and threw his shoulder at the man beside me, at young Reeve, 8 months on the color, his first season on the mile, the way he had thrown it at me, expecting the same wobble, the same silent prize. Reeve did not wobble. Reeve was braced for it because Reeve had heard the laugh too, and a KingsGuard who has heard the laugh is a different proposition from one who is taken at a dead diagonal out of a blind crossing. The shoulder met a man set like a stone in mortar, and it was the runner who bounced, who staggered, who put a hand down on the cobbles to keep his feet while the column passed him without a single head turning. I heard the slap of his palm on the stone. I heard this time no laugh. What I heard instead was the crowd, not a roar. A change in the air, the way a room changes when the joke stops being funny. A man near the rope said, loud and flat, "He's assaulting them." Somebody, and did not finish because the somebody was already there. 2 stewards in their bright vests had closed in from the rope line, and behind them, unhurried, the shape every guardsman on that route knew was coming the moment the first shoulder landed. 2 police constables who walk the processional on March days precisely, for the man who decides the KingsGuard is a prop in his own film. He got up off the cobbles, and he played the only card men like him have left when the air turns. He turned to the crowd, arms wide, all wounded innocents, and said, "I didn't touch anyone, they walked into me. You all saw it, they marched right into me. That's assault, that's..." And the beautiful, terrible thing about a route lined with 300 phones is that the sentence had nowhere to land. 40 of those phones had him on the diagonal. A dozen had the second lunge. The woman who had said, "Oh no," had filmed the whole of it, steady as you like, including the part where he pasted at the rope beforehand. He was standing in the middle of the most thoroughly witnessed 40 yards in the city, insisting on a version of events that every person around him had just watched be false with their own eyes. We did not see most of what came next, because we did not turn around. That is the discipline, and it is also the point. The column does not stop to watch its own vindication. We marched on up the processional with the drum unbroken, 14 where there had been 14, the dress as clean as it had been at the lower barracks, and behind us the route closed over the incident the way water closes over a thrown stone. But Halloran, who is permitted to turn his head, told me later exactly what he saw, and I will tell it the way he told it, because it is the part that matters. The constables did not run. They did not need to. One of them, an older man with a steady walk, came up to the runner where he was still appealing to a crowd that had stopped agreeing with him, and asked him, perfectly civilly, to step to the pavement. The runner refused, of course, loudly, on camera, demanding to know what he was being accused of, who he was, did he know who he was. The constable answered every question in the same level register, the way you answer a child who has decided the rules are the problem, and when the runner tried to push past him and resume his jog alongside our retreating column, to get one more shot, Halloran said, one more frame of himself beside the men in red, the older constable simply put a hand on his arm, and that was the end of the parade he had cast himself in. No drama, no struggle worth filming. A man who had spent the morning trying to manufacture a violent reaction from the most disciplined people on the route was led to the pavement by the one man on it who answered him with the same restraint we had, and it must have been a bitter thing for him to discover that the calm he had been hurling himself against was the standard issue of everyone in uniform that day, not a quirk he could crack. We reached the gates of Holt Court at the time we always reach them, because the column does not arrive late to spite a man, and we wheeled into the forecourt and halted and presented and went through the changeover as we have every March day since, before the runner was born. I stood my new post at the inner arch with the morning sun coming over the stone, and I will be honest with you about what it cost, because the channel that tells you these things never costs anything is selling you a statue, not a man. My shoulder throbbed where his weight had gone in. There was a bruise coming under the red wool that no one would ever see, the size of a fist, the exact map of another man's decision to use my body as a stage. And under the bruise, harder to set down than the bruise, was the residue of the want, the half-second on the cobbles when every old instinct in me had wanted to take him down, and the discipline had held it, and holding it had not been free. People imagine restraint is the absence of feeling. It is the opposite. It is the full weight of the feeling, carried and not dropped. I stood my post, and I let the throb in my shoulder and the heat behind my ribs both spend themselves the way I had let the lunge spend itself. And by the time the sun had climbed the inner wall, I was a wall again. And that is the work, and no one claps for it because no one can see it, and that is exactly as it should be. It would be a tidy story to tell you that was the end of it, that the runner was let off and the world moved on. It was not the end. It was the start of the part he had not done the math on, the part that does not happen on the route at all, the part that happens slowly, in offices and on screens, in the days after the drum has stopped. The first clip went up within the hour. His clip, the one he had built the whole morning to make, and it was, I am told, a small masterpiece of its kind. It opened on his grin. It cut to the diagonal, the hit, my quarter-turn wobble, slowed down and circled in red so you could not miss the inch I had moved. It cut to his voice crowing, the statue moves. And it ended before the second lunge, before Reeve, before the constable, before the slap of his own palm on the stone. In his version, a brave and funny man had proven that the famous unbreakable guard was breakable after all, and the only price of the joke was a few seconds of a stranger's startled face. It did very well, for about 4 hours. People who had not been there laughed and shared it, and told each other the guard was a bit much. All that ceremony, look, he flinched. It's all theater anyway. And then the other clips went up. The woman who had filmed the whole of it, the man on the north pavement who had caught the pacing at the rope, the official route camera which the court does not hide and never has, mounted high on the gate pillar, which had recorded all 40 yards from above in one unbroken shot. The diagonal, the hit, the laugh, the run ahead, the planting in the road, the second lunge at Reeve, the bounce, the appeal to the crowd, the constable's hand. From above you could see the thing he could not show you from his selfie angle, that the column never broke. That 2 files of 7 walked up a hill at a single unchanging pace while a man flung himself at them twice, and the only thing that moved an inch was the man who flung himself. From above, his masterpiece looked like exactly what it was, a man racing something that was not racing him, and losing, and not understanding that he had even entered. I have thought since about the difference in how the two kinds of clip live. His clip was fast and it was loud and it was built to win the first hour, and it did. It was a sprint, like the diagonal he ran across the road, all forward energy, all timed to a single moment, designed to take the prize before anyone could look twice. But a sprint is over the instant it is over, and it leaves the runner standing in the same place, out of breath, with everyone now looking at him in the cold light. The high camera shot was the opposite. It was slow. It did not crow. It did not circle anything in red. It simply showed 40 yards of truth from above and let a man's own actions sit there for as long as anyone cared to watch, and the longer it sat, the heavier it got. That is the column too, if you want to know. The column does not win the first hour. The column wins the long walk. The runner had bet everything on the sprint and never once considered that the thing he was charging had no interest in the first hour at all, because it had been built to outlast everything, and it intended to. There were, it came out, other clips of his, older ones, a pattern. He had done versions of this before, smaller ones in other places, to other people in other uniforms who were not bound by an order as old as ours, and who had given him the reaction he came for. A shove, a shout, a hand thrown out, and each of those had been a small trophy in his collection. He had come to the King's Mile because we were the biggest stillness he could find, the hardest wall to crack, and cracking it would have been the jewel of the set. He had mistaken us for a harder version of the same game he always won. He did not understand that we were not playing the game at all. The men in the other uniforms had been individuals, and an individual can be provoked into being his worst self for a second. We were a column. There was no individual in front of him to break. There was only the line, and the line does not feel insulted, does not feel cornered, does not feel the need to prove anything to a man with a phone, because the line is not a feeling. It is an agreement, kept by men who are gone and men not yet born, and a shoulder cannot argue with an agreement. His own counter, the one in his head that had been climbing all morning, turned on him. The number that had felt like a prize at hour 1 was a brand by hour 6. The comments under his clip filled not with the admiration he had built it to harvest, but with people who had seen the high shot asking why he had cut the part where he charged a teenager on his first season, and where the constable was, and what he had actually thought was going to happen. Sponsors who attached themselves to a rising number detached themselves from a falling one faster than you would believe. By evening 2 of them had quietly removed his name from their pages. But that was the small consequence, the noise of it. The real consequence was quieter and came in an envelope. What he had not understood, what men like him never quite believe until it is in writing, is that a deliberate shoulder charge into another person is not a stunt. It is not theater. It is not, whatever he told the crowd, the guard walking into him. It has a name in the law, and the name is assault, and it does not become a smaller thing because the man you charged was wearing a ceremonial uniform and had trained himself not to cry out. If anything, it becomes a clearer thing, because the very stillness he had been so proud of cracking was, in the end, the cleanest possible proof of what he had done. There was no scuffle for a defense lawyer to muddy. There was no shove back to call it a fight, no raised fist to call it mutual, no moment where I had done a single thing but march. There was only a man who twice ran his full weight into people who were doing nothing but their lawful duty, filmed from 9 angles, narrating his own intent to the camera the entire time. He had, with enormous effort, manufactured the most unambiguous case against himself that I have seen in 15 years on the route. There is a thing that happens in the regiment when one of these mornings goes the way that one did, and it is worth telling, because it is the other half of why the column holds. We do not talk about it much on the march, but we talk about it after in the guard room, in the low, even voices men use for things that matter. The older hands had seen the high camera clip by the time we came off duty, and one of them, Taverner, who walked the mile for 30 years before they moved him to the guardroom desk, found me in the boot room with my tunic off and the bruise already going the color of a storm. He did not ask if I was all right. He looked at the bruise, which was a clean print of a shoulder, and he said only, "Good line," 2 words. From Taverner, that is a medal. Then he said the thing the old ones always say, the thing that gets handed down like a rifle. The day you wobble and grab is the day he wins, and he doesn't even have to be right. You gave him nothing. Nothing is the whole game. He was telling me what I already knew, but a man needs to hear it from someone who held the same line for 30 years and watched the same kind of fool try to break it 100 times. That is how the structure renews itself. The bruise heals. The lesson is passed on. The next man holds because the last man held and said so. What none of us said, because we did not have to, was how close young Reeve had come to the other road. 8 months on the color, charged twice by a grown man at a run, and the easiest thing in the world for him would have been to plant a boot and put a forearm out and answer the lunge in kind, and the law and the cameras would have turned, in that instant, from the runner's confession into a fight, into the KingsGuard struck a member of the public, and the morning would have belonged to the man who deserved it least. Reeve had held. An 18-year-old in his first season had felt a full-grown man's weight come into him on purpose twice, and had done nothing but be a stone in mortar, and in doing nothing he had kept the whole truth clean. I have known men twice his age who could not have done it. When I told him so in the boot room, he went red and said he had only done what the man beside him did, which is the most KingsGuard thing a young man can possibly say, and the truest. He had set his stillness by mine the way the man behind me sets his pace by my heels. That is the column. That is the whole of it. He was charged. The barge, both barges, the one on me and the one on Reeve, went forward as assault, and the deliberate running into a ceremonial march on a public route added the kind of charge the city keeps on the books precisely because the King's Mile draws, twice a week, exactly the sort of man who decides that the most disciplined people in the country exist to be poked until they react. I did not bring it. Reeve did not bring it. We are not the ones who decide such things, and we would not have, because the column is not a thing that takes offense. The column simply continues and lets the root and the law be what they are. The court brought it, and the police brought it, and the high gate camera brought the truth that made it simple. I had to give a statement, which is its own small discipline, to set down in plain, flat sentences the thing the whole world had now seen in slow motion. I wrote what I have told you, that I saw him at the rope 40 seconds before, that I read his intent from his stance and his angle and the camera turned on his own face, that I chose, knowing what was coming, to hold the line and do nothing else, because the line is the whole of the duty and the breaking of it is the whole of the failure, that the blow spun me a quarter turn and I felt the want to grab him and let it pass, that the man behind me lengthened his stride and the man beside me closed the dress and the column did not so much as ripple. The officer taking it down read it back to me and looked up and said, "You knew he was going to hit you, and you let him." And I said, "I held the line. That was the order, and the order is older than him." He wrote that down too. His defense when it came was the one I knew it would be, because it is the only one men like him have. That he had not meant any harm, that it was content, that it was a joke, that the guard was a public spectacle and he was a public commentator, and where exactly was the line? His lawyer leaned hard on the first clip, the masterpiece, the grin and the wobble and nothing after. And then the room watched the high camera, the full 40 yards from above, and there is no joke that survives being seen from above. You cannot call a pace diagonal into a moving column an accident when the same camera caught you pacing it at the rope. You cannot call it harmless when it shows you charging a second man after the first did not give you what you wanted. You cannot call yourself the victim of men marching into you when the footage shows the men marching in a straight line at an unchanging pace, and you crossing into them at a sprint twice on purpose, while saying out loud what you were doing. His own narration, the thing he had recorded to make himself the hero, was read back to him in a quiet room as the clearest evidence of intent anyone could have asked for. He had filmed his own confession because he had never once imagined he was doing anything that would need confessing. He changed his plea. They usually do when the high shot comes out. There is a moment, I am told, that comes over such men in such rooms. The moment the version they built collapses and they are left holding the version that is true, which they have never looked at directly because they have spent the whole time admiring the other one. He stood and said, in a voice with all the crow gone out of it, that he had not understood it would be taken this way, that he had only meant to make people laugh, that he was sorry. Whether he meant the last part I cannot say and do not need to. The law does not require a man to feel the right thing. It only requires the truth to be established, and the truth was established the moment the camera looked down from the gate. He was convicted on the assault. He was ordered to pay for it, not a fortune, but a real and public sum, and a record that will follow the name he had spent the morning trying to make famous, in a direction he had not planned. He was made to write, as part of it, an apology to the regiment and to Reeve by name, the young man he had charged on his first season, and that, I think, was the part that finally reached whatever in him was capable of being reached. It is one thing to lose to a wall. It is another to read your own hand, admitting you ran your full weight at an 18-year-old standing his first months of duty, who did nothing but the thing he had sworn to do, and held. Reeve was steadier about all of it than I was at his age. When the verdict came down, he asked me only one thing in the guard room, polishing his boots for the next morning's mile. He asked whether I thought the man had ever, even for a second, understood what he was actually running at. I have turned that over many times. No, I told him. I do not think he ever did. He thought he was running at a man, and a man can be made to flinch, made to grab, made to lose the thing that makes him a man and become, for one filmable second, just a body in red doing something ugly. That was the whole of his plan, and it was not a foolish one. It has worked on plenty of men in plenty of uniforms who were not ready for it. What he never grasped is that he was not running at me. He was running at the column. And the column is not a man. The column is 200 years of men who agreed, each in his turn, that the line matters more than the moment, that the pace matters more than the provocation, that the thing they are part of is bigger than the thing that wants to break them. You cannot barge that. You can put your shoulder into one piece of it, and the rest of it simply takes up your weight and walks on, because it was built, deliberately, over centuries, to do exactly that and nothing else. He thought my stillness was a personality. It was a structure. He could no more knock me out of it with his shoulder than he could knock a bridge down by leaning on a rail. That is the thing I would want a man to take from it if he took anything. Not that the guard is tough, though we are. Not that the law caught up with him, though it did. But that discipline is not a single hard man holding himself together by will. Discipline is what lets many ordinary men become one unbroken thing, so that when one of them is struck, the blow is shared out across all of them until it is nothing, and the man who was struck does not have to be a hero. He only has to hold his step and trust the men around him to hold theirs. I did not beat that runner with strength. None of us did. We beat him with the fact that we were a we and he was an I, racing alone against a thing that had no need to race. And a man alone always loses that one, sooner or later, on the route, or in the room with the high camera. The next March day it rained, the steady gray rain the processional gets in autumn, and we walked the King's Mile from the lower barracks to the gates of Holt Court in 2 files of 7, bearskins darkening, rifles at the slope, the drum keeping the only time that matters. The crowd at the rope was thinner for the weather, but it was there, the way it is always there, and somewhere among them, I have no doubt, were people who had watched the high camera and come to see for themselves whether the column really did just walk on. We did. We always will. Reeve was on the color again, his boots like black mirrors, his line dressed clean, 8 months become 9. And as we passed the crossing where the runner had paced his diagonal, I felt my left shoulder, healed now, take the cold and give nothing back. A small thing happened at the gate that I will keep. A boy at the rope, 6 or 7, soaked and delighted, snapped up a salute as we wheeled in, the wobbling, whole-arm salute the young ones give, all heart and no drill. I am not permitted to break formation for it, and I did not. But the law that holds me still has never once stopped a man from meaning something behind his eyes, and I have learned that the young can read what is behind the eyes better than any camera ever made. I gave him nothing he could film and everything that mattered, and his grin told me it had landed. That is the salute I march for, not the one a man tries to wring out of me with his shoulder. The one a child offers because he has seen, even soaked and small, that some things in the world will not be moved, and that there is a kind of safety in that he does not yet have words for. The runner wanted the guard to move so he could own the moment we broke. He got, instead, a record of the morning the column did not break, told from above where the truth lives, and a name that means now the man who lost a race nobody else was running. I got a bruise that faded and a question from a young soldier that I hope he carries longer than the bruise. I held the line. The order is older than him, and it will be older than me. That is not a hard thing to understand in the end. It only feels hard from the outside, where all you can see is a man standing still while the world throws itself at him. Stand on the inside of it once, in the cold and orderly place behind the eyes, and you learn the truth the runner never will. The stillness was never the weakness he came to break. The stillness was the strength he could not even find the edge of, and the column walked on and walks on, and will be walking up that hill in the rain long after the last of his clips has gone quiet, and the last of us has handed the line to the next man, who will hold it too.